welcome to the first MMA Lawcast episode of 2025. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, ensuring you leave no stone unturned for these upcoming MMA events. With the addition of 2 new promotions, bringing our total to 19 different promotions from all over the world. In 2025, we're adding the newly minted Global Fight League GFL, which I believe will be drafting their teams at the ending of January, and I believe in April is when they'll be kicking off their schedule, and we'll also be adding Anthony Pettis Fighting Championships, APFC, which constantly has odds available. So why not add it to the Fight Archive to allow the subscribers to take full advantage of that as well. We've surpassed 4,700 fighter profiles, 19 total promotions, like I said, and also there is a 7-day free trial for you to try it out for free before you hop on and start paying for the service. So find out why we have over 115 subscribers to this service. Utilize that free 7-day trial. Check it out with the link in the description below. I'm sure you will be more than happy with it if you enjoy studying and predicting your own fights. All right. 2025 is upon us. We got a little bit of a new look. I like to change things up ever so slightly every calendar year. This year, changing up the lighting, changing up the camera ever so slightly. Got a little bit more decorative stuff in the background that I'm considering on improving upon, but still working and figuring out this whole lighting situation. I think it's good, but I'm more than happy to take some comments and suggestions in the comment section below if you are a lighting or tech wizard of any sort that is willing to offer up some advice for your boy. But I'm really liking how it's starting to look. Maybe a little bit more light or figuring out how to deal with the brightness. We'll figure that aspect of it out. 2024 was a big year for your boy, as it was the most profitable year on the official tracked record, as we had plus 88.83 units for a 5% ROI. We went ham in terms of the amount of bets that we made, but we came out close to 100 units of profit, and I'm very happy with that, especially with the amount of work that I continuously put on a weekly basis, not just covering the UFC, but all the other different promotions that I cover as well. If you guys missed the recap video that I dropped a few days ago for 2024, I did drop some tidbits in terms of my plans for 2025, so I'll quickly go over that right now for anybody that missed that. I will be introducing a new podcast called the Legacy Warriors Podcast, and that will be covering the 2 best feeder leagues to the UFC. That is the LFA, Legacy Fighting Alliance, and Cage Warriors, which is primarily based out of the UK, but they do often have some shows out there in San Diego. We all know Conor McGregor, Paddy Pimblett, all those other great fighters coming out of the Cage Warrior scene, but also LFA producing a ton of UFC talent, either coming to the Contender Series or coming straight over to the UFC. So I thought I might as well shine a light on the Legacy Fighting Alliance as well as Cage Warriors in the form of the Legacy Warriors podcast. So you can look for that every weigh-in date for those promotions. So for example, LFA 199 goes down this weekend on Friday. So on Thursday after the weigh-ins and they've finalized the card, I will drop the video breakdown for you guys strictly on the YouTube page. So all of you guys can always look forward to having Legacy or LFA breakdowns and Cage Warriors breakdowns. Your one-stop shop right here for your boy. Also, a couple other changes. Chalk or Not is a new segment I'm going to be dropping to replace the Dog of the Night, top 3 Dog of the Night candidates video that I normally drop every Wednesday. So I'll be introducing this new one called Chalk or Not. I feel like I'm one of the better guys in the game in terms of picking a chalky spot or avoiding those chalky spots. So what I'll be doing is going over all the chalky spots on every single UFC card and noting it, whether it's worth parlaying or passing or even playing straight up to try to squeeze out as much profit as you can from those spots. So look for Chalk or Not on Wednesdays. And then the prop drop. So as you guys already know, I usually drop my 3 best prop bets and long shot every Friday. I had a horrible run in terms of my props last year. So that is kind of what inspired this change here. Prop drop will pretty much be a brief breakdown of the entire card from a props perspective. I'll highlight highlight my favorite props from every single matchup, talk about some of the long shots on each matchup, or some of the sure shot or props that you should be targeting. And then at the end of this segment, I will drop my favorite 3 props as well as a long shot, which I'll be tracking in the comment or description as I normally do as well. And then obviously Locky 2-step / Locky Trinity free parlay will still drop as regular on Fridays. And the top 3 lock of the night candidates will drop as usual on Tuesdays. And lastly, the quick picks video that you guys have come to love will drop on Thursdays. So quick refresher here. Mondays, MMA Lockcast. Tuesdays, top 3 lock of the night plays or top 3 lock of the night candidates. Wednesdays, chalk or not. Thursdays, quick picks. Fridays, prop drop and the free parlay video. So there you guys go. That is my plan for 2025, starting with this week. Last thing I quickly want to say, the Global Fight League. They have been saying that 2025 will be their starting year. So I will treat them like the PFL and Bellator, and I will drop full card breakdowns for the GFL whenever they start putting shows on. So don't worry, I got you covered. I do also want to quickly say that I won't have my cam available for the rest of the week. So the rest of the segments that you guys will get for the rest of the week will strictly be audio with some visuals as well for you guys, but no video. Got some family visiting and I won't have access to the studio as much. So I still want to drop the audio for you guys, still drop the content as usual, but we'll be back to the video stuff next week. So don't worry, YouTube videos will still be uploaded, but it'll only be audio that you guys will be hearing from me. All right, clean slate 2025. We're going to reset pretty much all the, lock of the night record, dog of the night record. But I do want to quickly say the last lock of the night play for the UFC and Daniel Marcos did end up hitting for us. It was a little bit closer than I wanted it to be, but we still ended up getting the job done. And our dog of the night as well hit with David Grant as he was able to go out there and defeat Ramon Tavares. And as always, shout out to the guys over there at GadzhiyaSulovWins.com, providing your boy a platform to drop written content on a weekly basis. Thursdays, we drop the main event breakdown, and Fridays, we drop the 3 best moneyline spots. Make sure you guys check out GadzhiyaSulovWins.com, not just for the UFC, but for all the other great content that they have available for all other sports. All right. That's a wrap on all the intro, giving you guys the brief on what's good coming into 2025, all the usual plugs. Remember, LFA 199 going down this Friday as well. I'll have a full card breakdown on the YouTube page on Thursday, but in terms of my tracked and official plays, you might be able to decipher them in the video, but if you want access to it, all my official plays, check out the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Link for that in the description below. All right. Let's get right into the breakdowns for these cards, for this card for UFC Vegas 101, which is headlined by a rematch, a strawweight rematch here between Mackenzie Dern as she takes on Amanda Ribas, hoping to exact revenge after Amanda Ribas was able to defeat her over 5 years ago by decision, pretty much outstriking her and nullifying the ground game. So I'll break that down later on in the podcast, but we do have a solid card to kick off the UFC schedule in 2025. So without further ado, let's get right into this bad boy. First fight up, we got the return of Nurullo Aliev coming in at minus 390 as he goes up against Joe Solecki, who comes in at plus 315. Now, this is a short notice spot for Joe Solecki, who is stepping in for Yanel Ashmouz, who was unfortunately forced to pull out of this matchup. And now we have Solecki stepping in to fight Mr. Nurullo Aliev. Now, Aliev still very young, just turned 24 last month. This guy is a high-level blue-chip prospect, very solid, relentless wrestling, just as he showed in his fight against a very dangerous Rafael Alves back in February of 2023. That was a very weird fight where we saw Aliev actually lose a point in the first round for biting the fingers of Alves, but it was unintentional. He managed to eventually get the fight back to the ground, and he got back to that grind. He has a very solid, I believe, 9-0 record now. Does a great job in terms of using his wrestling to control opponents from that top position. He has finished 2 out of his 9 wins, but that also instills confidence in terms of his ability to go 15 minutes and utilize that same approach to still get the leg up on his opponents. I'm very high on Aliev, and I'm very pleased that the UFC was able to get a replacement for him here so that he can make his return for, nearly 2 years away from action. He was supposed to fight back in November 2023 against Matthias Rombeski. Then that leg injury happened and he was sidelined for the entirety of 2024. Now he returns this weekend. He's going up against Joe Solecki, who's currently riding a 2-fight losing streak, most recently getting grinded out by Grant Dawson. Joe Solecki is a high-level BJJ black belt, but that seems to work against him, especially when he's fighting other wrestlers who can keep him in bad spots. There's even that fight against Jim Miller where he lost the entirety of the first round because he was playing off his back a little bit too much and was unable to catch Jim Miller in anything. Luckily for him, he was able to get to his grappling in the second and third rounds and end up getting his hand raised that way. But Grant Dawson was able to nullify him, stay out of his submissions, and keep him on his back. And even Jared Gordon was able to completely outwork him, utilizing a mix of striking and grappling to get his hand raised that night. And that just goes to show where Joe Solecki is lacking. Instead of looking for submissions off of his back or reversals, he should be looking for ways to get back to his feet. But that's going to be very hard for him to do here against Aliev, who will likely keep him on his back and keep him pretty much on the defensive the entire time. I do believe in Aliev's submission defense here, even though he has, not faced the toughest strength of schedule on the regional scene, but I do believe this kid is the truth, and at minus 390, I believe he's worthy of a consideration in terms of being a parlay piece, but I think he runs through Joe Solecki here and wins this fight on the scorecards. Next up, Fatima Kline coming in at minus 1,000, going up against Victoria Dudakova, who comes in at plus 700. Now, starting off on the Kline side of things, she was originally expected to compete on the Contender Series last year. Luckily for her, she got to skip the line and she was able to jump right into the UFC, taking on a short notice replacement bout where she went up against Jasmine Jasudavicius up a weight class. And I think that fight was a perfect example of why weight classes are made. Jasudavicius utilized her strength and power to overwhelm Fatima Kline, who normally does a great job in terms of grinding her opponents out and utilizing her high-level BJJ approach. But she was unable to get off any success against Jasudavicius, as Jasudavicius swept her on the scorecards and picked up a 30-27 decision to end up getting her hand raised. Now Kline back at her actual weight class of 115 pounds. I think she's more than willing to go out there and showcase to us why she is such a highly touted prospect and why she is deserving of that minus 1,000 line. Her striking is improving and it is still clean and crisp, something that she could possibly utilize in this matchup, but at her best, she is a fighter that takes fights to the mat and grinds her opponents out from that top position, looking for submissions, but also being able to go the full 15 and grinding opponents out. She goes up against Victoria Dudakova, who is very highly touted coming into the UFC. And although she was 8-0 going into her last fight, I think we saw how green and how raw she still is, especially with some of the fight IQ mistakes she made against a veteran like Sam Hughes. Sam was able to do a great job in terms of staying away from her grappling, but also utilizing it offensively and putting Dudakova on her back and putting her in bad positions. We saw Dudakova have some decent success in the striking realm, but for the most part, Sam Hughes was able to dictate the pace throughout that matchup and take advantage of some of the flubs in the fight IQ of Dudakova. Dudakova at her best is a fighter that normally looks to take fights to the ground and grind opponents out from that top position, but she struggled to showcase that against Sam Hughes, and I think she'll struggle to show that once again here against Fatima Kline. Look for Kline to utilize her pretty much overall advantage here to do whatever she wants to end up getting her hand raised. Obviously, Dudakova could be improving and she could show some new wrinkles to her game in this matchup, which is why at minus 1,000, no matter who the fighter is, it's a prohibitive favorite. You should not be betting minus 1,000s because of the lack of benefit it provides in any parlays. This is a very volatile sport in mixed martial arts where a banana peel moment could happen and you're going to be kicking yourself for playing a minus 1,000 if that ends up being the only spot that doesn't end up cashing. I believe Kline wins. And the feeler that I might end up taking if we can get some decent plus money on it will likely be Fatima Kline by submission. And that will be my official prediction as well. But in terms of a money line spot here, I think it's a pass. I think it's too wide, but I do think she still ends up getting her hand raised. Give me Fatima Kline by submission. Next up, Magomed Gadzhiyasulov coming in at minus 220, going up against Bruno Lopes coming in at plus 190. Now, Gadzhiyasulov had a little bit shakier of a performance last time around in his UFC debut against Brandon Ribeiro, as Ribeiro was able to chip away at the lead leg of Gadzhiyasulov, causing him a lot of issues in round one. And luckily for Gadzhiyasulov, Ribeiro has terrible fight IQ and was going out there and pretty much giving up takedowns and allowing Gadzhiyasulov Gadzhiyasulov to get back to his game in the second and third rounds to go on to win that fight on the scorecards. Gadzhiyasulov is a grappler, surprise, surprise, but he is a guy that is slowly improving his striking game. But just as we saw in the Ribeiro fight, that is still an aspect of his game that opponents can take advantage of if he allows opponents to out or at least strike a little bit longer than they should. Very poor strength of schedule on the regional scene, in my opinion. I think that we are seeing him hit sort of a wall when he's fighting guys that actually provide a legitimate amount of resistance. And that's what he's facing this weekend in Bruno Lopes, who was finally able to earn his UFC contract in his second attempt on the Contender Series. Back in 2023, he actually got knocked out by the aforementioned Brandon Ribeiro, and Lopes was a gigantic favorite going into that matchup. Lopes went back to the LFA, defended his light heavyweight title, and then eventually got called back to the Contender Series, where he had a little bit of a slow start against his opponent, where his opponent was able to land some big shots, even dropped Lopes in the middle of that first round. But luckily for Lopes, his durability paid off for him, and he was able to chip away and start turning up the volume in round two as his opponent started to slow down, and Lopes was able to pick up steam and eventually get a finish at the ending of the second round. Lopes is a BJJ black belt, and I think that's where he is best, when he's able to bully opponents to the mat and utilize that top control and submission game. But it's showing in recent performances that his striking is starting to catch up to his grappling game, although I do believe that is where he is in most danger against the upper echelon of UFC light heavyweights. In this matchup, though, if Lopes can keep this fight in the standing realm, he is likely the better striker. Gadzhiyasulov does not present a whole lot of issues in that realm, and I think that's a spot where Lopes can actually dictate the pace and land the more effective damage. In terms of the grappling realm, Gadzhiyasulov might be able to out-scramble Lopes, but if Lopes can showcase some decent takedown defense and keep this fight upright, this is much closer than a minus 220 indicates on Gadzhiyasulov. Thus, I'm going to have to lean with the Brazilian in this matchup, who only has that one defeat to Brandon Ribeiro on his record. And again, Gadzhiyasulov not a huge knockout threat here, at least in terms of the striking realm, and that could allow Lopes to make this a lot closer than the odds suggest. Thus, I'm going to go Bruno Lopes, and I'm going to pick him to win this fight by decision. Next up, Ernesto Kareckaite coming in at minus 270, going up against Nicole Caliari, coming in at plus 240. Starting off on the Kareckaite side of things, she suffered her first professional loss last time around as she went up against Diony Barbosa and got caught in some bad positions, allowing Diony Barbosa to get the back position at opportune moments. But we did see some good submission defense from Kareckaite, which eventually allowed the fight to end up hitting the scorecards. Unfortunately, Kareckaite got started a little bit too late, and she ended up giving up the first two rounds, which the judges ended up scoring in Barbosa's favor. Kareckaite is a long, lanky fighter at this weight class, and she normally does a good job in terms of stinging her opponents from distance with her straight shots down the pipe and utilizing a high-volume approach to win her matchups. We saw that on display when she was on the Contender Series, going to a split decision victory over Carly Judas in a matchup that was spectacular to watch because of the lack of regard that either opponent was showcasing to their opponent in terms of the power that they were presenting. And it ended up actually being that Dana White ended up signing both of them to the UFC because of how fun and entertaining that matchup was. Now Kareckaite needs to be a little bit more responsible with her striking approach and be a little bit more responsible in terms of the defensive side of things. If she can slip a few shots, land more volume than her opponents, then she's obviously going to go out there and win a more decisive victory, especially with her coming in at minus 270 in this matchup. That's something she's going to have to put an emphasis on if she hopes to come out with her hand raised. She goes up against Nicole Caliari, who is a training partner of Marina Rodriguez, high-level strawweight in the UFC already. Caliari started off as a Muay Thai specialist earlier on in her career, but has slowly started to get the rest of her jiu-jitsu game together, which actually ended up being the reason she won her matchup on the Contender Series to earn her contract to the UFC. She's going up against a BJJ black belt in Karine Laframboise, and that was a matchup where we saw some slick judo throws from Caliari, but ultimately it was an armbar off her back, which got the tap from Laframboise, earning that UFC contract for the Brazilian fighter. Caliari has some decent striking, but I do think she has a little bit of clunkiness to her game that Kareckaite will be able to take advantage of. Even with that said, at minus 270, I have a little bit of reservations in terms of taking the shot on Kareckaite at chalk, because if Caliari can get to some of those judo throws, she might be able to have some success on the ground and make this fight closer than the odds actually indicate. But I do believe from the submission defense and grappling defense that we've seen on display from Kareckaite in the past, she should be able to nullify the majority of the threat that Caliari presents in those grappling exchanges, and then eventually get this fight into the striking realm, where I think Kareckaite can start running away in terms of volume and showcasing a better cardio game as well. So look for Kareckaite to utilize of a high volume approach to end up winning this fight on the scorecards. Next up, Preston Parsons coming in at plus 295, going up against short notice replacement Jacoby Smith, who comes in at minus 170. Now we'll start off on the Preston Parsons side of things, who I was huge on last time around as he took on Ogden Aliev in mid-2024, and I believe he was my lock of the night play that night, and unfortunately he came up short. I really like the pace and pressure that Parsons normally presents to his opponents, allowing him to go out there and grind his opponents out and set a very high pace that most opponents are not able to keep up with. Unfortunately for him, Ogden Aliev had all the answers as he was able to stuff all the takedown attempts and then get to a striking game and really bust up Parsons and cause Parsons to get a little bit frustrated and eventually start stressing out, and that caused him to start slowing down later on in that fight, and that's why we saw Aliev start to control it even easier as the fight started to get into deeper water. In terms of the striking realm, Parsons throws a lot of big, heavy shots to try to close the distance so that he can eventually look to get fights to the ground and implement that pressure pace that he's so well known for, and that he's actually nicknamed after as well. He goes up against Jacoby Smith, who's going to be making his UFC debut on short notice here after earning his UFC contract on the Contender Series, where he absolutely mollywopped his opponent and got that second round TKO stoppage to earn the contract. I've been hearing about Jacoby Smith for a very long time, training out of Fortis MMA, previously training out of American Kickboxing Academy up there in California, but a lot of the wrestlers over there from AKA have moved down to Fortis MMA. Kyle Crutchmer, another one as well. But Jacoby Smith, very high-level wrestler, and it's paying off for him in the MMA world. Recently, his last two fights before the Contender Series, he actually showed off his hands, showcasing that he has a ton of power and can actually knock out his opponents as well. He finished an opponent in 61 seconds and the following opponent in 18 seconds, showcasing he is not messing around. He has great wrestling, showcases solid cardio in the fights that he's actually gone to the distance as well, and I think he'll be able to showcase that here against Parsons. I think Parsons is going to struggle to get his wrestling game going. That's going to cause him to start second guessing some of these spots, and I think that will allow Jacoby Smith to really start dictating the pace, taking control of the fight, landing some takedowns of his own if he needs to, showcasing his cardio advantage, maybe showcasing some of his power, which might muzzle some of the offense of Parsons, and that will allow Jacoby Smith to do what he wants here. I do not think Jacoby Smith would have taken this fight on short notice had he not already been preparing, especially with him already having an undefeated record. I think he was just waiting for the opportunity to make his UFC debut, and the opportunity presented itself this weekend, and I think he'll make good on it as he goes out there and grinds out Preston Parsons. Now, the majority of Smith's wins have come by finish, but I do believe if this fight has an over 1.5, that will probably be the best way to go in this fight. Anything better than minus 150, I think is worth taking a shot on. Again, over 1.5. 2.5, I'm a little bit concerned about, but I do think this fight ultimately ends up hitting the scorecards anyway. So if we can get Jacoby Smith by decision at a good enough price tag, that might be the best way to go about it. But I wouldn't be mad at anybody looking to parlay Jacoby Smith either. All right, next up, Thiago Moises coming in at minus 195, going up against Trey Ogden, who comes in at plus 170. Now, I'll start off on the Thiago Moises side of things, who had no answers for Ludwig Kline in his last matchup as he dropped all 3 rounds on the scorecards and losing a 30-27 unanimous decision. I really expected Moises to be a little bit more active, showcase some of that calf kicking that we saw in his previous matchup, and obviously have the grappling edge, but the power and explosivity of Ludwig Kline kept Thiago Moises on the defensive, and we saw Kline hurt him numerous times throughout that matchup and eventually win that fight by decision. I believe he went to his grappling in the 3rd round after hurting Thiago Moises badly, and then from there Moises could do nothing with his BJJ off of his back because of his exhaustion and just being hurt as much as he is. When he's on, he's one of the better fighters on the roster. Just as we saw when he butchered Mitch Ramirez, just as we saw when he submitted Melquizael Costa, butchered it. But when he's fighting somebody that can dictate the pace and keep him in uncomfortable positions, that's where we start to see him really be a little bit hesitant, start to be gun shy, and allow his opponents to dictate the pace. He's 29, 30 years old, so he could still be improving, but I think that we're starting to see a clear difference between the fighters that can beat him and the ones that he'll likely come up victorious against. Now, he's going up against Trey Ogden, who's not getting as much shine that I believe he should be getting. The last 14 months has been a real resurgence for the 35-year-old, putting together masterful game plans and executing them to near perfection. He should be on a 3-fight winning streak. If you guys remember that Nicholas Mota fight, he was pretty much dominating that entire matchup, caught Nicholas Mota in a submission. Unfortunately, the referee stepped in a little bit too early before Mota was actually out or tapped, and that caused that fight to end up going to a no contest. But Ogden has bounced back with 2 stellar performances against Kurt Holobaugh and last time against Loik Radzhabov, and it's showcasing that he can go out there and implement a grapple-heavy approach and then keep opponents on their back. I love what he did in the fight against Kurt Holobaugh. I believe it was from the half guard position that he knew that was the best way to keep Holobaugh on his back. Holobaugh is a BJJ black belt as well, and he has some slick submissions off of his back, but Trey Ogden stayed in that half guard, kept his forehead on his chin, on his chest, and he was able to keep Holobaugh on his back and grind that fight out for the most part while chipping away at him with some decent shots on the ground. Ogden, not the greatest striker, but he does a great job in terms of closing the distance, finding the openings that he needs, and getting to his takedowns and then controlling opponents on the mat. I think he's going to be looking to challenge Thiago Moises on the ground here, as Ogden is a BJJ black belt as well. I believe it's been over 5 years since the last time that Trey Ogden has been submitted, and I think he's a far superior grappler at this point in time than he was 5 years ago. This could play out close, and I'm going to lean on the game planning and executing that game plan of the Trey Ogden side here, and especially with how underwhelming Thiago Moises has been in some of these bigger spots. Again, a lot of people overlook Trey Ogden, which is why we've been able to get some good lines on him over his last couple of fights. We're getting another spot here where we should be able to take a shot on him, hoping that he can go out there, grind this fight up, utilize that game plan. It might be boring, it might not be the most exciting of things, but as long as he gets his hand raised, that's what matters. So I'm going to go Trey Ogden here, and I think he ends up winning this fight by decision. Next up, we got Marco Tulio coming in at -500 as he takes on Ihor Potieria, who comes in at +375. Now, we'll start off on the Marco Tulio side, who is a training partner of Charles do Bronx Oliveira. Obviously, Tulio, a much bigger fighter than Charles Oliveira, but it's clear that he brings the same type of aggressiveness and thirst for violence that we normally see from Charles Oliveira. Tulio loves to go out there and look to finish his opponents. He's finished 9 of his 12 wins strictly with his striking, but he likes to go out there and put that big power on his opponents and try to put them away. We saw him in his fight against Yusuf Belgaroui, I believe that was his name, last season in 2023 on the Contender Series, and he utilized a full bag of his mixed martial arts, getting to his grappling and doing some good work in terms of even landing some big shots on the feet against the striker. But Dana said it wasn't enough for him, and he ended up having to go back to the regional scene, pick up another win, and then come back on the Contender Series in 2024, and he ended up finishing his opponent in the second round of that fight, completely knocking him out, and ended up getting his hand raised and signed the contract to the UFC there. He has some solid prospect. He's on an 8-fight winning streak leading into his UFC debut. He's a solid middleweight that a lot of people should be keeping their eye on, but I really like to see him continue to round out his game because he's going to need to lean on that in the UFC, especially as he starts taking steps up in competition. He goes up against Ihor Potieria, who had a successful middleweight debut back in February where he was able to get a victory over Robert Burchak. Luckily for him, that was a matchup where he was able to pretty much sense all of the offense that was coming from Burchak, who was being very predictable with his offense, and then from there, Potieria was able to get the better of him. He now looks to snap a losing streak after he was finished by Michel Pereira and then lost a decision to Cesar Almeida a couple months back. That was a fight where he was getting touched up on the feet, tried to get to his grappling, got a lot of those positions reversed, and we saw Almeida actually have some good success from that top position. But Potieria is a guy that has, he made his name off of just pretty much can crushing on the regional scene, putting guys away quickly. And now that he's actually facing resistance in the UFC, we're seeing that he's a, borderline non-UFC fighter. So this weekend will be a big test for him to see if he can actually hold on to his UFC spot and if he can go out there and try to upset a hyped prospect coming into the UFC as a massive favorite. I still lean on the Tulio side at minus 500, but because of the chaos and knockout power that we could see from Potieria, things could get a little bit iffy for Tulio. Again, Tulio is a guy that is primarily a striker who's still working on the grappling aspects of his game, and if he can't, find that safety in the grappling, if things get a little bit too chaotic on the feet, then things could start to, start swaying in Potieria's favor. With that said, I don't think the line on either side is, enticing enough to take a shot on either guy. I don't want to pay chalk on Tulio in case he goes out there and gets knocked out. I don't want to pay the plus money on Potieria because I just don't think he's that great of a fighter. So I'm going to pick Tulio to win this matchup, but I just don't think minus 500 is worthy of taking a shot on Tulio here. Again, his resume is great winning streak that he's on, but we see this all the time. High prospects from the regional scene come to the UFC, then they finally fight somebody that's going to provide resistance to them. Potieria being one of those examples of, the flip side of this, and then end up coming up short in some of these spots. So Tulio still has a lot to show, but I do think he is the better overall fighter here. I'd consider him around minus 200, even minus 220, but minus 500, I'll pass. All right, next up, we got Jose Johnson coming in at minus 180, going up against Felipe Bunes, who comes in at plus 155. Now, I'll start off on the Johnson side of things, who may have gotten a little bit of ahead of himself last time around as he went up against Asu Almeida, talking himself up, saying he's the best flyweight in the world, one of the best fighters in the world, and Almeida pretty much put him on his back for the entirety of 15 minutes and kept him there. Jose Johnson, former bantamweight, has been fighting at flyweight, I believe, for a couple fights now, but very long, lanky, 6 foot tall, 71-inch reach, very nasty striker in terms of when he gets into his groove, utilizes that 1-2 down the pipe. His defensive grappling is improving. That's something that he can actually be successful with off of his back, depending on the opponent that looks to put him there. But he likes to stay very active there as well, utilizing his long limbs to either throw up triangles, throw up arm bars, or even look to push on his opponent's hips and get back to his feet. He is best when he can establish his range from distance and get to the volume with his punches, with the straight shots down the pipe, and his front kicks up the middle. If he continues to improve his defensive wrestling game, he's shown some good fights. There was one on the regional scene against Mo Miller where we did see him showcase decent takedown defense, but it needs to be more consistent. But again, Asu Almeida, very tough cookie for him to crack there. But Johnson is still a guy that can be successful at flyweight, depending on the level of opponents that he's being put up against. He's going up against Felipe Bunes, who actually made his UFC debut in the first event of 2024, and now he makes his second walk to the cage in the first event of 2025. In that fight against Joshua Van back in 2024, he got, had a great start, was really dialed in, landing some big shots on Joshua Van, but eventually started to slow down in the second round and ended up breaking and getting finished by the, streaking Joshua Van now, who I believe only has one loss now to Charles Johnson, but has stayed very active and gone out there and finished numerous opponents as well. Getting back to Bunes, though, he is a BJJ black belt. He's trained under the likes of the Pippo brothers, Patricio and Patricky, and it seems during his off time now, he's actually opened up his own gym, Pippo's brothers branch, pretty much his own training facility now, and that's what it seems like he's been busy with in 2024. I believe he may have had an injury that he was dealing with as well. I'm not overly impressed by the kid. Decent striking. Previously, he used to utilize his BJJ a lot, but his wrestling is not that great. But he's trying to rely on his striking now, which if he's unable to finish his opponents, he really starts to fall short on and really starts to slow down and end up allowing his opponents to start cruising in those spots. I think this is a great spot for Jose Johnson. I do believe Johnson can dictate the pace in the striking realm. I believe that his striking his height and his reach advantage will allow him to dictate the pace of this matchup. And I don't think Bunes has a good enough wrestling game to get this fight to the ground where he could potentially take advantage of Jose Johnson with his BJJ black belt. With the improvements in the BJJ that we've been seeing from Johnson, I think he should be okay should this fight hit the mat. But for the most part, I do think we'll see Johnson keep this fight in the striking realm. I wouldn't be surprised to see him actually get to his offensive grappling later on as Bunes starts to slow down. But I think for Johnson to have major success in this fight, a lot of it is going to take place in the striking realm, and I think he'll do a good enough job in terms of keeping Bunes at the end of his punches and doing a good enough job in just terms of establishing his game that way. So give me Johnson by decision, and I feel pretty good about it as well. All right, next up, we got Punahele Soriano coming in at plus 160, going up against Uroš Medic, who comes in at minus 185. Now we'll start off on the Soriano side of things, who went 1-4 to end his middleweight run in the UFC in his last 5 matchups. Thus, he decided to switch over to welterweight, and it paid off for him big time as he was able to pull off an upset against talented welterweight Miguel Baeza, pretty much keeping him on his back and grinding that fight out for the most part, normally utilizing a very heavy power striking approach, looking to knock his opponents out with his blitzing shots and closing the distance with explosivity. Soriano has tried to utilize wrestling in the past in the middleweight division, but opponents have been able to stop it, and then he starts to slow down, pretty much ripe for the picking for his opponents to pick him apart and even finish him or go on to win decisions. But it seems like he's very strong in the welterweight division, utilizing that wrestling approach, just as we saw when he went out there and pretty much did the damn thing against Miguel Baeza. Now we know that's probably what he's going to look to rely on in his future welterweight matchups, probably still utilizing some power striking to try to close that distance and try to make his opponents gun shy, or at least open up spots for him to change levels and get fights to the ground. But we know for the most part he's going to be looking to get to that wrestling. He has a little bit of a wrestling background, nothing to, no real collegiate level stuff that he needs to worry about there. But I do think that Soriano is a good enough fighter to utilize that wrestling against a certain level of competition in the welterweight division. Is Uroš Medic one of those guys? Well, let's talk about it. Medic, for a long time, was a guy that I discredited in terms of his skill set because he came from the Alaska FC scene. But after getting signed to the UFC, he's moved to California, starting trading with King's MMA, and it seems like he's a little bit better than I was initially giving him credit for. This is a guy that utilizes a very nasty and aggressive Muay Thai striking approach, but guys with a good enough wrestling game can keep him on his back and pretty much punish him from that top position. He's a good striker with his elbows and his knees, but when he's fighting off takedowns, he starts to fall off in terms of the effectiveness that he normally brings to the table. I knew last time around against Tim Means he's going to showcase very solid work. He's going to go out there and absolutely pummel him and eventually get that finish, and that's exactly what he was able to do. He's finished all 10 of his pro wins and actually never seen the scorecards at all in his 12 professional fights. Now, the question is, can he deal with the wrestling of Puna? I don't think so. I think Puna will do a good enough job in terms of closing the distance, landing some big shots, and actually causing Medic some issues. He might even be able to land the knockout and get Medic out of there, but I think he'll be best suited to try to get this fight to the ground and grind him out from that top position. We know when he can dictate the pace and control the pace of his fight, his cardio is much better in those matchups than they are when he's unable to get the takedowns or he's unable to get the knockout. So give me Soriano by decision, which is a spot that I may actually look to target as a prop, but in terms of a straight up money line spot, plus 160 on Soriano to win, not a bad shot to take here. Medic needs to finish him early, but if he's unable to, he's going to start to get grinded out with that wrestle heavy approach from Puna and end up succumbing to it. So give me Soriano and Soriano by decision. All right, next up, Christian Rodriguez coming in at plus 190, going up against UFC debutant Austin Bashi, who comes in at minus 225. Now, I'll start off on the Christian Rodriguez side, who I'm still stunned, actually ended up getting submitted by Julian Rosa a couple fights back, because this is a guy that has largely showcased stellar submission defense and good grappling defense, just as we saw when he fought a guy like Isaac Dalgarian, and even the Raul Rosas Jr. fight, where he found himself in some bad spots, but stayed calm, cool, and collected, and eventually utilized his discipline and technique to get out of those bad spots and end up getting to his offense, where he was able to out-damage Rosas and even out-damage Dalgarian to end up winning both of those fights on the scorecards. This guy is a very talented fighter all around. I think that Arosa fight is going to, leave a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths, just like it did mine, but we cannot overlook the fact that this guy is still very talented. From the first amateur fight that I was able to find on this guy, very crisp, clean striking, very technical, and you can see all the years that he's spent in Milwaukee at Rufus Sport has paid off for him, and still he can showcase a very high level of accomplishment should he stay in the UFC and actually start getting some success together once again. Clean striker, good combinations, good leg kicker, great grappling as well, good defensive grappling, good jiu-jitsu, good scrambling. I think he's a great fighter. I think he's being overlooked in this matchup against a new shiny thing on the block in the UFC in the form of Austin Bashi. Now, Bashi's a great prospect as well. We're talking about a kid that's 13-0. He had a great performance on the Contender Series to eventually get that rear naked choke, I believe, in the second round to earn his contract into the UFC. But primarily a wrestler, training at a little-known gym in Michigan. He utilizes a power striking approach to eventually change levels and get fights to the ground. I'm not the most impressed with his controlling, which is why I kind of like Rodriguez in this matchup, because I think if Rodriguez can continue to initiate scrambles, he might be able to keep Bashi on the, not getting overly confident, or at least not establishing a dominant position, where Rodriguez could eventually get this fight to the feet again. And from there, I think he's a much more technical striker. I think a lot of the power shots that we see from Bashi leave a lot of openings for more technical strikers to get the better of him. Just as we saw when he fought Askar on the regional scene, Askar was doing some great work in the striking realm until Bashi's grappling eventually bailed him out of some bad spots and eventually winning that matchup. But Rodriguez is probably the toughest fighter that Bashi has ever competed against. I think that's going to cause him a lot of issues here. So look for Rodriguez, in my opinion, should be able to go out there, nullify most of the grappling from Bashi. I do believe Bashi will land takedowns, get a little bit of control time. But look for Rodriguez to create some scrambles, maybe throw up some submissions off of his back, but eventually get the most work done in the striking realm, where I think he'll be able to land enough shots on Bashi, maybe make this fight look slightly like the Dalgarian fight, maybe a little bit more convincing than that fight ended up being, and then from there go on to win this fight on the scorecard. So plus 190, plus 200, sign me up for C-Rod in what is Austin Bashi's toughest fight to date, and this will be a good test and a good barometer for Bashi to see where he is in the UFC thus far, and if he can defeat somebody as skilled as Christian Rodriguez this early in his UFC career. So give me Rodriguez, better striker, good enough defensive grappling, and that should allow him to keep this fight where he wants in the second and third rounds and win this fight on the scorecards. All right, next up, Chris Curtis coming in at plus 210, going up against Roman Kopylov, who comes in at minus 245. Now, starting off with Chris Curtis, going into his July 2022 fight against Jack Hermansson, he was riding an 8-fight winning streak with 3 of those wins coming inside the UFC, a couple of them huge upsets over guys like Phil Hawes, and I believe even Brendan Allen, who he knocked out. And then he rematched Allen in a main event slot where he ended up getting defeated. Close fight, but I do believe some bad fight IQ moments from Chris Curtis actually cost him that matchup. But there were some good spots from Brendan Allen to get his grappling going and even land some big shots in the striking realm as well. But we know when guys are significantly better strikers than him, he ends up having a little bit of issues. Roman Kopylov could be one of those guys as well. Nasruddin Imavov was able to tee off on him and have some good success in the striking realm. Chris Curtis is 2-3 over his last 6 fights, with one of those fights being a no contest. He could easily be 2-4 had that Nasruddin Imavov fight continued, but it was a bad head clash that ended up causing a stoppage to that matchup. When Curtis is at his best, it looks like him utilizing combination striking inside the pocket. He has very nasty power, especially a good job in terms of finding his way through the guard of his opponents with those combinations, with those uppercuts and those hooks, and I think that's where he ends up doing his best work. He had a good case of winning the Kelvin Gastelum fight. There was some controversy in that matchup. His fight against Jack Hermansson was a very weird one where Hermansson was pretty much circling the cage and only landing kicks to get his points there. And yeah, I think if Curtis, who normally showcases good takedown defense, if he's successful in keeping fights in the striking realm, he has a pretty good chance of winning most of his matchups. Now, he's going up against Roman Kopylov, who in his last matchup against Cesar Almeida had... I believe it was his last matchup or second last matchup against Cesar Almeida, had the betting community up in arms, right? Both guys getting a lot of love from either side of the betting community. A lot of people thinking that Almeida could showcase good enough takedown defense to keep the fight standing, where he should have had a technical striking advantage, which he did showcase. But Kopylov's wrestling did end up paying off for him that night, as he was able to land some opportune takedowns. And we did not see as good of get-ups and takedown defense from Cesar Almeida as we had seen from him when he fought Dylan Budka in his previous matchup. Kopylov normally is a very good striker who utilizes good combinations, stinging power, and eventually finishes his opponents in the second and third rounds. But just as he showed in the Almeida fight, he's not scared to get to his grappling if that's what is the path that he needs to end up getting his hand raised. One big qualm that I have with Kopylov is his cardio. He has very bad body language late on in matchups, and I think if Almeida could have done a good enough job in terms of keeping that fight upright as we have had expected from him in the past, he might have been able to knock out Kopylov in that spot. And that's where Chris Curtis could be very live in this matchup. Curtis is a guy that's very difficult to put away. He's only ever been knocked out once in 42 fights, and it's been over 4 years since that. He's not been finished in over 4 years and has only ever been knocked out once in 42 fights. That's what I meant to say. Obviously, Kopylov might have a technical striking advantage here, but I wouldn't be surprised to see if he ends up going to his wrestling. But I don't think that will pay off for him too much here against Curtis, who normally showcases a good enough defensive grappling game. If he's able to keep this fight upright and get it into deeper waters, he's very live to pull off a late upset here and actually end up getting the knockout. What gives me pause in terms of having too much confidence in that, though, is Curtis, who is normally a welterweight, since joining the UFC, has started to compete at middleweight, and he's obviously outsized against a lot of his opponents, and that rings true this weekend against Roman Kopylov as well. So my prediction is actually going to be Kopylov. I think Kopylov lands those big shots early. I think he ends up being the second person to knock Chris Curtis out, but that's very low confidence. What I might be targeting in this matchup is Chris Curtis to win in round 3 by knockout. I'm sure we'll get a good enough number on that, and I think that's probably the best way to target this matchup to extract as much value as you can. But I do, in terms of an official prediction, I will lean with Roman Kopylov and Kopylov to win this fight by knockout, but be very wary in terms of paying the chalk on him, especially if this fight ends up going into deeper waters. All right, next up, the aforementioned Cesar Almeida coming in at minus 275, going up against Abdul Razak Alhassan, who comes in at plus 235. Now we'll start off on the Cesar Almeida side of things, who suffered his first pro loss in June at the hands of Roman Kopylov. I've already talked about it. Almeida showed great takedown defense and get-ups against Dylan Budka, but was unable to showcase similar things against Roman Kopylov. There were, glimpses of some of the defensive grappling improvements that he made coming into MMA primarily as a kickboxer, but he was unable to overcome the grappling that Roman Kopylov was able to put on him. But Almeida, at his best, is a guy that likes to go out there and really touch his opponents up with his striking, good combination striking, doesn't really chase the knockout, but rather just lets it come to him. I believe he did actually bounce back from that loss to Kopylov. He bounced back in October from that loss to Kopylov against Ihor Potieria, showcasing some of those defensive grappling improvements that we've come to know from him, where he's been able to keep fights in the striking realm or even reverse positions and actually grind out Potieria from that top position. Almeida, again, very nasty kickboxer, and if he can continue to get to that, I think that's where he's going to have most of his success in the UFC. Now he's going up against Abdul Razak Alhassan, who unfortunately was given a no contest against Cody Brundage last time around, and he was actually scheduled to fight a teammate of Brundage a couple months back against Josh Fremd. That was in October, but unfortunately Josh Fremd missed weight, and that fight ends up being canceled, further leading to Alhassan being even more pissed off than he actually should be. Power puncher, we know he has a judo background, but anytime he tries to implement a grapple-heavy approach, his gas tank does not allow him to really have too effective of a game, and then he starts to fall off later on in matchups. He trained at Fortis MMA, I believe, for a little bit, trained at Team Elevation, but it seems like he's gone back to his own gym down there at, I believe, somewhere in Texas, and he's training with a smaller gym now, and I believe at this stage in his career, he's just trying to collect a couple paychecks, trying to land that big knockout, and hopefully not having to go into deeper waters. I do lean with Almeida in this matchup because I believe he's the better overall fighter. I think he's a fighter that can actually touch up Alhassan from distance as long as he can avoid the big power and if he can stay away from too much danger on the mat. If Alhassan looks to get this fight to the ground, I think Almeida can pretty much cruise to a win here. What I'll be looking at is the Almeida by decision prop. Alhassan, as dangerous as he is, and as much as his body language does not look great later on in fights, he's a guy that's very difficult to put away. I think Joe Pyfer might have been one of the only guys to actually put him away. So I'm going to lean on Almeida to go out there and outwork and outstrike Alhassan on the feet and eventually win this fight on the scorecards. If I can get Almeida by decision at plus 400 or better, that's what I'm going to be targeting in this matchup. I'm not overly intrigued or super enticed to take a parlay shot on Almeida here, but I do think he ends up winning this matchup. Just a better striker overall, and he should have good enough defensive grappling to stay away from too much trouble on the mat against Alhassan. So give me Almeida and Almeida by decision. All right. Next up, co-main event time. We got Santiago Ponzinibbio coming in at minus 110 and his opponent Carlston Harris, pick'em fight, coming in at minus 110 as well. We'll start off on the Santiago Ponzinibbio side of things, who's very much in the midst of some tough times. Last time around, he dropped a split decision against Muslim Salikov. It was a controversial decision, to say at the least, but it was a loss nevertheless. But now he is 2-5 since returning from that near career-ending disease, I believe, or illness that he was suffering from back in 2018, 2019. If you guys remember, he was on a 7-fight winning streak before he sat on the sidelines. He was scheduled to fight Robbie Lawler in a high-level fight, a big-time fight. Had to pull out of it, and then since then he's been unable to capture the glory that he had from that winning streak. He turned 38 back in September. Things are going to start to go haywire for him, or continue to go haywire for him, as we've been seeing. But he's still a very good striker, puts together solid combinations. His durability and his speed is really what's starting to cause him issues, because of opponents, if they've been able to land big shots on him, they can hurt him and possibly put him away. And again, his speed has been a big issue for him as well. Defensive grappling is normally on point, likes to keep fights in the striking realm, and then from there get to his combination striking style. And he's going to have to lean on that a lot here against Carlston Harris, who normally does a good job in terms of dragging his opponents to the ground and looking to tie them up with submissions. 6 of his 19 wins are by submission, but he does a great job in terms of taking opponents to the ground and actually grinding them out from that top position. So whether it's submissions or decisions, ground game is normally how he likes to get things done. His striking is very wild and erratic, which is why we've seen opponents like Shavkat Rakhmonov be able to knock him out. That's the issue with Harris. He's just a little bit too wild. He's a little bit too reckless. He's a little bit too chaotic. And that's where I believe that Ponzinibbio could actually have the edge here. If Pons can take a few clean shots on the chin, which are inevitable whenever you're fighting somebody as chaotic as Carlston Harris, Ponzinibbio has a good enough shot in terms of actually landing his own offense and possibly even getting an own knockout victory as well. I lean violence in this matchup more often. Under 2.5, sitting around plus 110, plus 120, depending on the bookie. I think that's the way to approach this matchup. I think whoever wins this fight ends up putting their opponent away. I'm going to lean with the cleaner striking of Ponzinibbio and his power, and especially with Harris, I believe, coming off a knockout loss. I think this is a prime opportunity for Ponzinibbio to showcase his power and showcase some of the durability issues that Harris has as well. So give me Ponzinibbio by knockout. Money line, again, minus 110, not too bad. If you feel confident in it, go for it. But I'm going to go with the under 2.5, cover my ass on both sides here, and hope for a finish. But I think it comes from the Argentinian fighter here. So give me Ponzinibbio and Ponzinibbio by knockout. All right. That brings us to our first main event of the UFC calendar schedule in 2025, and it is a rematch. Like I said at the top of the podcast here, where we have Mackenzie Dern coming in at plus 175, looking to exact revenge against Amanda Ribas, who comes in at minus 205. Now, we'll start off on the Mackenzie Dern side of things, who was able to snap a 2-fight losing streak last time around, as she was able to defeat Lupita Godinez by going the distance and getting her hand raised. She was able to land some good takedowns, get some good control time, and actually have some success in the striking realm, pretty much muzzling the offense of Godinez, where Dern was able to dictate the pace and win that fight for the most part. She was able to land some clean shots in the second round. She got beat to the punch in the second round, but was able to land clean enough shots in the third round to eventually take command of that fight and end up getting her hand raised. high-level BJJ. We know what it's all about for Dern. She's always going to struggle to get a wrestling game going, so she needs to provide a little bit of chaos, just as we saw in the Angela Hill fight, where she just runs forward, lands some big strikes, or throws big strikes, gets the respect from Angela Hill, and then from there try to parlay it into a takedown, or at least some sort of guard pull where she can pull off a reversal and get to her game. She's very slick, very nasty on the ground, and that's where she usually ends up getting her best work done. Her striking is improving ever so slightly, but it's not something she can completely rely on to actually end up getting her hand raised. We know what her ceiling is. This fight against Amanda Ribas might be able to tell us if she can break through that ceiling or not, but she has a tough test here. And Amanda Ribas, who since 2021 has been alternating wins and losses back and forth, most recently losing a decision to former strawweight champion Rose Namajunas. Now, Ribas is a fighter that likes to utilize pretty much a full mixed martial arts game. Her striking, I've kind of given her some issues with in the past. I think it's more flash than substance, but it worked out in her fight against Mackenzie Dern, where she was able to land enough shots, bloody up the nose of Dern, stay busy enough. But her grappling is very high level as well. I believe she's a BJJ black belt. If she can get fights to the ground, she does a great job in terms of controlling opponents, just as we saw when she did against Viviane Araujo. And her cardio is definitely improving from when she was originally in the UFC as well. She's 31, firmly entrenched in her prime, but the current run that she's on is a great indicator of what her ceiling is as well. So this is a great test for both fighters to see whether they have what it takes to, move forward in the division, or if they're going to just stay middling in their division as well. I have to lean with Ribas here, though. I think Dern's success is going to come by trying to get this fight to the ground, but Ribas has already shown she can shut that part of Dern's game down. Even if she does end up getting taken down, this is 5 rounds. I believe her submission defense is good enough to deal with anything that Dern throws her way. And then from there, in the striking realm, I think that Ribas' speed and stinging power could end up being the difference maker in this matchup. She's going to make Dern pay for all the bad mistakes that Dern makes whenever she's striking, keeping her chin up in the air, not really throwing with much technique. Look for Ribas to land the more effective shots over the course of 25 minutes and end up getting her hand raised on the scorecards. -205, slightly wide because, we have seen time and time again in rematches, we usually see the first person end up getting their hand raised, the person who lost in the first fight end up getting their hand raised in the second fight, especially in the last couple of years. So that's what usually ends up giving me pause, even if the first fight looked very dominant, just as it did for Ribas that time around. So, I might parlay Ribas. I might keep my eye on the line, see if she drops down to around that -150, -160 range, which is somewhere where I find a little bit of value because I put her at about 65%. I think she wins this fight. I'd be surprised if Dern is able to accumulate a ton of control time, and I'd be surprised if she's able to get the better of most striking exchanges. So give me Ribas and Ribas to win this fight by decision, and thus marking the first favorite to win a main event in the UFC 2025 schedule. All right, there you guys go. Appreciate all the love and support. I'm working out the kinks in the background. Obviously, I know some of these lights are giving me some trouble, but I'll figure it all out. First show of 2025, we'll get this thing on the road as best as we can. Reminder, Tuesday, top 3 lock of the night candidates dropping for you guys. Wednesday, we got the Chalk or Not debut segment coming out. Thursday, quick picks. Friday, the extended version of the prop show. I'll drop that for you guys, as well as my free parlay. Not to mention, Thursday as well, we're going to be doing the Legacy Warriors podcast, debuting that, breaking down the LFA 199 card for you guys top to bottom. So make sure you guys tune in for that. Show some support to that Legacy Warriors podcast, and I look forward to continuing to drop that content for you guys on a weekly basis for the 2025 schedule. Let's start off on the right foot. Let's build upon the plus 88 units of 2024, and let's see if we can volley ourselves into some profit to kick off the year. Appreciate the love, appreciate the support, and I'll see you guys on Tuesday for the top 3 lock of the night candidates. Drop that like, drop that subscribe, drop a comment. I'll see you guys again on Tuesday. Peace.
Last thing.